All right, thank you for staying with us. The conversation continues. It's a special edition for the inauguration of our President Bola Tinubu. I have a new guest joining me. Yes, female for this matter, so that we balance gender. Well, Mrs. Fumi Komolafe, she's a columnist, labor reporter, and editor for more than 30 years. It's good to have you join this conversation.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Like they'll say, ladies first, so that I will be able to get home. They open the door for me when I get home. So let me start with you. A lot has been said already here around the president's speech and high expectations following this very important event. Let me start with your general overview. What you've seen, what are the notable points for you today?
Yeah, I think it's a speech of a man who has a clear vision of what he wants to do. I noted his the part where he mentioned that there will be no more dual exchange, the foreign exchange aspect, the black market, it will be one rate. And I think that's very good. I also noted where he said women and youths will be involved in his government, and I believe that that is real him talking. He's not just reading a speech. He has demonstrated so far that he has so much faith in women and their capability to perform. So for me, that is coming from the heart. Another part that struck me, he said everything will be done to make sure that food is available. And I think when there's no hunger, poverty is minimized, and that's a lot. And then, of course, security. Because talking about availability of food is also linked to security. Why have people left the farms? People have left the farms because they are no longer safe. It's no longer safe to work in the farm. You are kidnapped. Women are raped. Women are attacked. And there are a lot of women on the farms,
Yes.
And everywhere else. So those parts of his speech really struck me. And I said, this clearly is somebody who has a vision, who believes, a clear vision of what he wants to do. And I trust that with God on his side, he will be able to bring them.
Let me take that to Mr. Premier. I'll be right back, but let me get Dr. Adedipe's view. Dr. Adedipe, let's talk agriculture here because we've touched on the forex aspect. Agriculture, food security, that's what Mrs. Komolafe is just talking about now. Our president is saying how we can achieve this at this time. Considering all of the efforts that have been instituted by the Apex Bank, not only the Apex Bank, even international donors and supports coming to the agricultural space, when do you see us getting to feed ourselves, at least to a level, before we talk of adding value and exports?
Okay, thank you so very much. Now, I made reference to this also earlier on, and like I remarked also, everything is based on data, okay? When you check what has been happening in Nigeria, number one, like Mrs. Komolafe just said, there's been a reduction in farm output as a result of the adverse effect of, insecurity on the one hand. But even at that, historically, before insecurity became a major issue for us, the agri sector in Nigeria, is the fact that we have not been able to get over the wastage that comes during, harvest season. Estimate given is that almost 60% of agri output in Nigeria goes to waste during the harvest season when we have a surplus. Okay, so that means two critical things the new government must pay attention to. One is processing, and then the second one is storage. So in which case, we are not saying government should invest in them. But just like I was going to say about earlier on, government needs to provide incentives for investors to go into that space and commit tangible resources into processing and storage. Once we can deal with those two key issues in the agri value chains, we are likely to increase the quantum of food that eventually make it to the market and then to the dining tables. And that deals with the issue of availability of food, one of the four elements in food security So, and of course, going back also to the conversation we have had over many years, what we are seeing in the template of a Greek evolution in other countries is that if there is a particular element, just like you mentioned, made reference to, government intervention, programs. If you take, for example, what we have done with rice, question is, can we replicate the same in major staple food crops? And I'm happy the president made reference to that in one of his recent speeches, the last 1 week, thereabout. In fact, he particularly gave example of cassava and corn. So can we repeat or replicate what we did with rice in that regard? In which case, provide incentives, provide intervention that will enable us to cultivate them in such quantum that the supply will be so huge that eventually it will cause those prices to dampen. Then, of course, we already have commodity exchanges. I'm privileged, I would say, to have been one of those that worked in bringing to life the Lagos Commodities and Futures Exchange. My company did the business plan for it and also worked with the management in terms of execution. So we know what that exchange is meant to do. It's also an infrastructure within that space. So these are the areas the government should look at. Instead of committing funds that we made mistake in the past, when we set up the Abuja Commodities Exchange that never got off the ground, the government should now be looking at who are the private investors in this space and invite them to a conversation. What do you need in order to operate effectively and scale your production? So these are the kind of things I expect government to within the agri space. Take every item, look at its entire value chain. So what is required in order for you to produce sufficiently to make supply begin to outstrip demand and therefore make food become affordable? Now that's on the one hand. There's also a place for technology. I will link it to the question you asked me earlier on, which I didn't get around to talking to. You asked about the digital economy. Now, I'm sure in the president's manifesto, there is an acknowledgement of the level of internet penetration in Nigeria. There's also what we call, netizens, that is Nigerians having access to the internet, all right? So now, when you take all of this, Nigeria is doing very well in that regard because we are ranked among the top 10 in the world in terms of internet penetration and all this. But how do we deepen that in the light of our policy and strategy on the digital economy? We want quality life for our people, but it also means we must encourage an entrepreneurship. So, and there's a basic principle in economics. Anything you want people to do, put incentive there. Because that principle says people respond to incentives. That, I believe, is one major thing this government can play on to change everything, right from revenue mobilization all the way to solving most of the problems they have, inherited. It is about what can we do in terms of incentives that will make investors put their money where we want it to be. Like some countries did. If you're investing a minimum amount of money in the ICT sector, for example, you have a tax waiver and maybe some other incentives. So foreign investors came into such countries and invested significantly in the ICT sector. And that helped them to evolve in terms of their digital economy. And that is the way it's going to be. Equally, and he has done it in Lagos before, he should do the same this time around. Yes, already we have some measure of e-governance at the federal level, but we need to scale that and then also interrogate the existing practices. Where are the leakages? So how do we plug them? He has such track record anyway, but it must come to play in terms of the kind of people he appoints to what we call economic ministries. Agri must be taken seriously as business. We call it agribusiness. So in which case, let the private sector be the forefront in terms of investment in agriculture. And that will help us a long way in solving the issue of food security to start with. And then much later, like you said, we can then think about export.
Interesting. Mr. Kwame, let me come to you. We talked about those innovative laws put on ground by the former president, Muhammadu Buhari. But can you say they achieved their objectives now in the course of his administration?
Thank you very much, Tolu. So, to a large extent, right, those laws, achieve. So if we are talking about, for example, the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020, talk about the Petroleum Industry Act 2021, and then also the Finance Act. To a large extent, these laws were enacted and they were there. But there is more about implementation. One of the greatest challenge that the previous government had, which the current government should really look at, is the issue of implementation. It is very key. If you understand, currently many of the ministries, departments, and agencies, they have gone technology. So when we talk about the digitalization, many of them have these digitalized platform where the processes are there. But the issue is about implementation, because the people that man these platforms, if their own orientation does not change, the issue will remain. And so that is one of the things that the current government should look at. For example, again, we talk about the Nigerian Startup Act, which was a laudable law legislation that everybody celebrated. That was passed in October 2022. Now, this is May 2023. What has happened to the Nigerian Startup Act? How many of the tech-enabled startups have been onboarded on the platform? Those juicy incentives, those attractions that we all celebrated for over 8 months now, what has happened? And the government is no longer there. But again, we understand that the government is a continuum. So these are some of the things that the current government should look at, because those are the things that really impacted the benefits of those great laws that we saw there. Another point I want to also say that really impacted on the previous administration was the issue of engagement. And I'm so happy that most of the speakers on today have hinted on it, have mentioned it. It is important that the current government engage with stakeholders before a policy is released, before a law is enacted. It is important that the various stakeholders involved in that sector, in that industry, are brought together and they discuss this and how, where and how does it impact. Because if these engagements are not taken into consideration, when the laws or policy come up, there will be a lot of back and forth, and people will say it is not really in our own favor when it is well-intentioned, but because they were not carried along, it will not really sit down well with them. So engagement is one thing that impacted the last government, and which we are hopeful this current government will be very good at ensuring that everybody is on the same page. Why I say this engagement is, if you recall the levy, the excise duty on telecom services, you saw the back and forth. In fact, it was as if there was an internal fight between the ministers. The Minister of Communication came up to say the telecommunications, they are exempted. And the Finance Minister came to say, no, they are part of it and they are included. And up to the point where the fiscal policy measures were released a month ago or so, they still added telecommunications as part of the sectors that will be subject to excise duties. So the place of engagements, both internally within the team and also externally among stakeholders, is very key. And finally, one of the things that also impacted those laws in the last government was data. Data. Aki was speaking about multiple taxation. You do not just hit companies with different taxes, right? There's need for you to look at the data, because currently the manufacturing sector is really in a dire situation, and we kept on, the last government kept on levying excise duty on it, and data shows that for in 2022, the profit margin is reducing, and these levies are still being levied on them to pay. So it is important that the current government look at data to say, okay, wow, okay, look at what's happening. Because if the private sector, the companies make profit, that is where the government benefit from the taxes. But when you put so much multiple taxes and all that, and we should now make their bottom line not to be good enough, it also, in the long run, reduces the company income tax that would have accrued to the government. You might say, okay, the government is getting VAT or getting excise duty, but when all this impact on their financials, it will now reduce ultimately the company's income tax that would have gone to the government. So really working with data would be a good one. It's one of the things that the last government did not really do well, and I'm hoping this government will take into consideration.
Great. I like that we're identifying all of this. And let me go back to Mrs. Komalafe now. Women participation is something that is very important. Yes, I'm going to ask you that question. I was at the private sector forum where Asiwaju addressed, that was even before the elections, when they asked him, how do you intend to carry women along? And in that room, lo and behold, more than 5 or 6 women, the likes of Abike Dabiri, Adiza Bala, I can go on and on. They were all there and they stood up and said, we are here already. What do you think about this person, his relationship, and see women handle key posts? Yes, qualified. We know we have a lot of qualified women running this government with Asiwaju.
I think while it is important that women are represented, I think what is more important is competence.
Good.
Because it's not just, that you're a woman and you're not competent, then you are of no benefit to the service of the nation. For me, I place competence before gender. Good. Where we find competent women, let them be put in the right places. And I'm saying that this time around, Nigerians, we don't want armchair ministers. Ministers that sit down in the offices and there's no direct contact or communication with the people as to implementation of policies. He made a point, and I was coming to that, about multiple taxes, and the president, President Asiwaju Bola Tinubu, also talked about that. Incidentally, I was at a forum of the private sector where the OPS reeled out this complaint to the immediate past Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, and nothing happened. So we talk too much. We talk so much and do little. And that's the problem. Women, yes, where we find competent women, women that can make marks. We have good women. Dora Akoyoye of blessed memory, many. That's just one example. From wherever the president finds them, not necessarily from his party. Wherever he finds them, and there's a way to look at all this. And I think that, give it to Asiwaju, he knows how to fish out, good hands. And God helping him, I think that he will give us competent women.
Let me follow up with you with regards to your experience in coverage of labor. And yes, you agree with me that labor plays an important role in economic development. There is no how we can do anything without running things with labor. And President Tinubu is saying subsidy has to go. We've known the position of labor around this, but in your understanding of subsidy, what do you make of this, and what would be your advice maybe to the labor leaders?
To the best of my memory, issues of removal of fuel subsidy or not started as far back as 1985 or 86. I remember an NLC document, oil subsidy lies, not facts. That was 1986. But that's about 40 years ago. A lot has changed. Okay, and we have come to realize, and I think that organized labor has shifted from the position of subsidy must remain to giving conditions. Our refineries must work. Now we've gone through 8 years. The refineries have not worked.
Only Dangote refinery that we expect to work.
The only gain we seem to have had when part of the subsidy was removed was under Abacha, when Buhari was made the PTF chairman and a lot of things. I think if people see what is being done, if people trust the government, I think we can go with removal of fuel subsidy. You were talking about agriculture.
Yes.
We have a lot in this country. Do you know that Nigeria, every day from mile 12, food goes into Benin Republic? We have. And he was making a point about the private sector. When the profits dwindle so bad and you have too much taxation, they cannot expand. Therefore, jobs cannot be created. I think that women I've made a point that competent women should be found. Then we should encourage women on the farms. There are a lot of women working on the local farms. There are private companies in Nigeria here that can be assisted to expand. When these companies expand, we will have, our youth will have jobs. And I'm saying that our ministers, we don't want armchair ministers. We want ministers that will liaise with the people, that will be practical. It's not just to say that, oh, multiple taxation, we'll do away without it, we'll do away with it, and then nothing happens. We want to see, look, somebody was minister for 5 years in this country, Professor Olikoye of blessed memory. He left us with primary health care. Everybody knows how to do ORT when your child is sick. We have had a minister in 8 years. I can't remember what he has left us with. That's why I'm saying we no longer want armchair ministers. We want ministers that will put in place policies that will impact our lives.
Interesting. So, Dr. Adedipe, I know you're there. Before I let you go, I'm thinking that the D-Day has come and a lot of more expectations. Now, many are saying those investors that have been sitting on the fence, this might be the time where they will say, Nigeria, we are here. We are bringing the money. Let's spend the money here. I don't know if you think that way now since we have a new government.
By all means, I think that way because I also interact with them because they make inquiries from entities like our own because we are in business consulting field. So, but I want to also say something that cuts across the last two issues you raised with my colleagues on this program. First is the reference to engagement. And I was quite happy that, I think it's Emmanuel that made reference to engagement. And then he mentioned also, impact. Now, there's something we call regulatory impact analysis, which, in fact, is something we put before the last two governments. That's between 2013 and now. I recollect that year specifically. Now, regulatory impact analysis means for every policy you are introducing, you want to also dimension how will this impact the sectors, the industries, and wherever is the target of that particular regulation. So that way you have an idea in the case of your engagement as to whether you get more of adverse effect than, favorable. And then you tinker with that particular regulation until you get to a point in the engagement where you are very sure that what you are doing will trigger favorable impact that will not only help those impacted, but also in the long term, help the government as well. Then secondly, now we had a discussion about women now. I see the role of women in the economy far beyond their being in the cabinet. Now, when you look globally, and that is around the world, anytime you interrogate what we call women empowerment, you discover one thing, and that is, number one, that most businesses owned by women thrive. And this is coming from data. And then secondly, coming out to my constituency, which is banking and finance, it is also on record, evidence-based, that when you give a loan to a woman, the chances that that woman will use it productively and repay the loan is greater than 90%. So we found also, especially in the microfinance space globally, that women are better in terms of loan repayment than men. So one of the things, therefore, is when you take that on the one hand, and then the data on poverty, again, mostly women and children represent about 40% of the population, the poor population. So we then say that if you want to grow your economy inclusively, you cannot be focused on women primarily, and then also bring youth into the conversation. And that is why what you mentioned earlier, Tulu, about foreign development partners intervening in agriculture. In more recent times, a good number of them are focusing on women and youth, even after zeroing on the agri sector for their intervention programs. So which means looking and going forward, We want to put before this government that, look, as much as possible also, they should give more attention to women entrepreneurs. And like, Mrs. Komolafe said, the women that are in farming, they are more committed. If you give any of them a loan, you are assured that above 90% of the time, she will work so hard and repay the loan. And that is what has been proven by evidence. So we cannot ignore that, therefore. So when we talk about women, we must look at it from those two perspectives. One is appointment of competent women into the cabinet, but the other one is how do we bring up programs that are focused, economic programs that are focused on women entrepreneurs. That's what I just said, let me add. But as for foreign investors, their appetite for Nigeria as an investment destination is very high. And many of them have remained in the last couple of years tentative, only waiting for an opportunity like this. And that's why I was excited when the president put out that word, that look, come to invest in Nigeria, your capital will be mobile. Bring it in, make money here, you won't hold back any of your money when you want to move it out. That is what investors want. In fact, from the perspective of portfolio management, what people look out for are three things. One is safety of my investment. The second is return on the investment. The third one is liquidity of the investment. And that is what I picked up from what the president said today. That is what investors want to hear. Once you give them that soundbite, then we now come back to what was mentioned earlier, by Emmanuel, that look, the next thing is to do it. Having said it now, let them feel it and see it happening. That is where we can see an explosion in foreign investment. And so capital flows will come in their numbers. So thank you very much.
All right, then let's wrap it up now. Let's get a parting shot from you. What would be your advice or your message again? I know you've said some already in our conversation, but in straight terms, what would you be saying would be maybe like the quick wins for this administration?
Well, I expect it to be focused, get a clear vision, and select the right people to work with. But more importantly, there should be good communication between the government and the governed, which was lacking in the Buhari administration. That government was not talking to people. They issue birthday greetings, but that's not addressing issues that people want. The government should have another way of getting informal information, apart from the information presented by cabinet members, because they usually don't present the true picture. But from the civil society, I think they should create a platform to engage the civil society effectively, for interaction, and that will let them get a feel of how the people feel and what they want and how to react to issues.
Interesting. So, Emmanuel, advice to incoming government, of course, how they can improve the business climate.
Implementation. Nigeria is not really, does not lack laws, Tolu. Nigeria does not lack legislation. What Nigeria lacks is the willpower to execute those laws. If this government can get this right, if you look at the body of laws, legislation Nigeria has as we speak, you will be amazed. So as far as this current government can really put their power to the ground to say we must execute the provisions of the law, and thank God he is the head of the executive, right? The executive arm of government. Once they can execute the law, and talking about the business climate, one of the things that really makes foreign investors to come to a particular place is where there is certainty.
Yeah.
Where there is certainty, because the investors don't want a situation where they come in after 1 or 2 years, the government, the policies or the laws change. One of the things they ask when they're coming to is they want some form of some level of stability. Stability of laws, stability of policies. Now, if those policies change within 1 year, within 2 years, and they've already made their projections, their projection is in 5 years, in 10 years, and if midway the policy change, then they will not come. So it is important that where there is a roadmap, the government should keep to it, follow the roadmap, and so that there is a form of certainty. And if there is even any way they want to change it, that issue of engagement should come in and some form of palliatives, right? Those are the things I want to suggest to this government, and I know and I'm believing that this government will be the government we have been waiting for.
I must thank you. It's a good way to leave it. I must thank you so much, Emmanuel Kweme. He's a lawyer and manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much for your contributions to this conversation. It's been very interesting. Almost 2 hours here. And I must thank you, Mrs. Fumikoma Lafe. She joined us in a way, but at least we're able to make sense of the conversation. To columnist, labor reporter, and editor for more than 30 years. That's no joke. I must thank you so much for your time. And to Dr. Biodun Adedipe, thank you so much. It's always great to have you join the program. Your contribution always notable and commendable. Thank you so much. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Chief Consultant, B. Adedipe Associates Limited.
Thank you so very much for having me.
All right.
And congrats again.
That will be it for this segment. My colleague will be taking over after this. And the conversation, of course, continues. Stay with TVC News.